Hey guys, Constance here. Welcome back to the homestead. I'm here in the kitchen, as you can see, and it is a super dreary, yucky kind of day. So I thought I would make some chicken soup. This is actually called chicken pot pie soup because it kind of reminds you of chicken pot pie filling. It's thick and creamy and full of veggies and really good. Now sometimes I'll actually make crackers out of a pie crust to go with this to really give it that pot pie sort of feeling, but that's totally optional. You don't have to do that. I do have this recipe on my website, and that recipe does include how to make those pot pie crust crackers. So if you are interested, I will put a link down below. So let me swing the camera around here and we'll get started. And we'll turn the light on since it is, like I said, very overcast and yucky outside. Alright, so to begin with, I'm going to dice up some chicken. And you just want about 1.5 pounds to 2 pounds. It really just depends on how much you want to make. I'm actually going to probably go a little bit heavy on my ingredients today because I'm going to make a nice big batch. We love leftovers around here, so I do not mind having a little extra. So I'm just dicing up my chicken into cubes, so I'm cubing my chicken, I guess. About 3/4 to 1 inch sized pieces. Alright, so I'm going to season the chicken here with a little salt and pepper. Just like that. I'm going to turn on my stove and I will add in, I'm almost out of butter there, so let me grab some coconut oil. Add in a tablespoon or 2 in my soup pot here. Then I'm just going to throw my chicken into the pot and I'm just going to cook it until the chicken is opaque. It doesn't have to be cooked through, just opaque, white, and then I will scoop it out and I will use the liquid, the drippings that are in here, to cook up some celery and some onion, which I'm going to dice. Now, ever so often I get questions about using a wooden cutting board if I'm concerned about cutting meat on it or anything like that, and the short answer is no. The more detailed answer is I am very careful about how I do that. I only use hardwood cutting boards, end grain, just nice, tough wood. The one I'm using today that you see in this video is a walnut one, and then I've got ones that are made out of different kinds of wood, but all end grain hardwood. You don't ever want to get a cutting board that's wood, that's just like a piece of, like a board. You want the end grain because it's denser and it's going to stand up to your knife hitting the wood a little bit better than just a flat piece of wood. And when I mean flat, I mean just like a board that's just been sanded smooth. It's just not tough. I'll show you an example. This right here is basically, I would call this a charcuterie board, or however you say that. This is more for serving on. It's not for cutting on because you can see all of the grain in this wood. It's not going to hold up to the abuse of a knife blade hitting it over and over again as you chop things. And And when your board starts showing wear and getting a lot of grooves in it, those grooves are what are going to hold bacteria. When you have a cutting board that's more of an end grain, it's going to hold up better, and you'll be able to use it for years and years. Now, when I cut meat on my wooden cutting boards, I always wash them with a little bit of soap and water, and I dry them off immediately. And I always keep my cutting boards, my wooden cutting boards, oiled using butcher block oil. You can find that at most kitchen supply stores. I think even Lowe's has it, like in the wood care section. But as long as you keep that wood oiled, it's not going to absorb the liquids from your meats. If your cutting board looks dry, it is dry. And then any liquid that gets on there is just going to get drank in by the wood, and that's not what you want. You want your cutting boards to always be nice and oiled. They should look like there's moisture in the wood, because a dry cutting board is not a safe cutting board, and a rough cutting board is not a safe cutting board. So you want well-oiled wood, and you want it to be smooth. Now I'm going to scoop the chicken. Scoop the chicken out. Using a slotted spoon, I'm going to leave all of the oil and drippings down there in the pot. And then I'm going to toss my celery and onion in here. And I'm just going to let this cook until it kind of begins to get a little bit tender. And while that is cooking, I'm going to dice up some potatoes, about 2 or 3 pounds. Just depends on how much potato you want in your soup. Now, like I've mentioned before, when I am using thin-skinned potatoes, like a red or a Yukon Gold, I generally don't peel them because the skin's so thin. If I'm using a russet potato, I'll probably peel that for a soup, but these thin ones, I just leave it on there. I just take a paring knife and I just cut off any kind of rough spots or any eyes, anything like that, and just leave the rest of it on there. Personally, I like the texture, I like the added fiber and all of that, and so I just leave it. If you don't like any skins on your potatoes, you can always just peel that off if that's your preference. So I'm just cutting these up into about 3/4 inch chunks, like that. Alright, those are nice and tender, so I'm going to add the chicken back into the pot. I'm going to add in my potatoes that I just cut up. Oh, and I missed some. There we go. Put those in the pot. And then I'm going to need 4 cups of chicken broth. Alright, so next I'm going to add in some frozen vegetables, and usually I would just use some frozen mixed vegetables that already come that way, but I didn't have any mixed blends, so I just took some frozen peas, frozen corn, frozen green beans, and I'm going to add these in. And I didn't have any carrots in the freezer, so what I'm going to do is right at the end, when this is almost finished, I'm going to open up one of my jars of canned carrots, and I will just drain out the liquid and just add them in here right at the very end. Now, like I said, I'm going a little bit heavy on some of my ingredients, so I'm actually going to need a little bit more liquid in here. You're gonna want just enough liquid, like just enough to cover up the contents in your soup pot here. Soups are really flexible. I mean, unless you're making major changes to the quantities, you're not gonna mess it up. All right, so that is like just enough to cover there. So now I'm gonna add in some herbs here. I've got some fresh rosemary out of the garden. And I'm just throwing in, I don't know, maybe a teaspoon or so of fresh leaves. If you're using dry, you would use a little bit less if you want to, or you can use a whole teaspoon or so. Then I'm going to add in half a teaspoon or so of dry thyme. And then some sage. And when I dry my sage, I just leave the leaves whole. Same with my basil usually, like this. And then when I want to use it, I just crunch them up into the pot. Just like that. And I'm putting in about a half a teaspoon or so. Maybe a little bit more, because I really love the flavor of sage. Alright. And I'm just going to stir this together. And again, I'm using just enough liquid to barely cover the contents that are in here, because there will be a little bit more liquid added at the end. So we're just going to let that cook until the biggest piece of potato that I can find is fork tender. And I'll clean up my mess. Alright, so my vegetables are done cooking over here, so right now I'm going to add the other liquid that I mentioned. You could use heavy cream, but I'm going to use half and half because that's what I've got in the house. I'm going to add about 1 cup of half and half to this, but I'm also going to thicken this at the same time. You can use flour, cornstarch, tapioca starch. I'm going to use arrowroot today, and I'm just going to put in probably about 2 tablespoons, because there's a good bit of soup right there. And I'm just going to go ahead and whisk this right into my half and half until it's all dissolved. I'm going to kind of bring that up a little bit so that it's bubbling. Pour that in. Alright, and then I'm going to go ahead and open up my jar of carrots and drain out the liquid. And I'm always asked about this. This is called a pry-a-lid. It is a vintage jar and bottle opener, and I bought it off of Etsy. And the great thing about this jar opener is it opens your lids without damaging them. So if you want to recycle, reuse your lids for whatever purpose you want, I'm not saying can with them, but I'm not saying don't can with them. I'll talk about that in another video. But this will open your lids. Dookie, what are you doing in here? Go on, out, go. This will open your jars without putting dents in them, without damaging them. So they are still in really good condition. Or your lids, I should say. Not your jars. It doesn't damage your jars either. It's your lids that I'm referring to. So now I'm just going to let this heat through. The broth is going to thicken up a little bit. The carrots are just going to heat through. They're already cooked. They cooked in the canning process when I pressure canned them. I'm going to add a little bit extra salt and pepper. Basically just let these carrots heat through, and then that'll be it. As you saw, this is a super easy recipe and it's really good. What are you doing, baby? What are you doing? Alright, so there you go. That is how you make my chicken pot pie soup. And of course I have a printable version of it on my website, cosmopolitancornbread.com. If you are watching this on YouTube, I will put a link to the recipe where you can find it to print it out or save it on Pinterest or however you like to save your recipes. And that print version also includes the instructions on how to make the little crackers out of pie crust to go with your soup if you would like to make those. So thanks for joining me here in the Homestead kitchen. I will talk to y'all next time.